Hello, my name is Starla Gibson, and I'm going to be going over some test data with you on a student that used to be mine. He is currently a 7th grade student, and for this assignment, we are going to refer to him as Justin. Some of the testing that I'm going to be going over with you that he was given over his school life is his intelligence or cognitive testing. It's also known as his IQ testing, achievement testing, social, emotional, and behavioral screeners, speech testing, adaptive behavior screeners, as well as just behavioral observations that were conducted on him. So starting with the intelligence or the IQ, Justin was given the Weschler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence. He was given the 3rd edition of this test. This was actually given during his 1st grade year, and he is currently a 7th grade student, and this still has not been updated. So for me, that's very concerning because that was 6 years ago. I feel like that was a long time ago, and there's a big difference in a child from 1st grade to 7th grade. So when he was given this intelligence exam, it had 4 different subtests on it. And they just kind of provide you with the child's verbal intelligence, their performing intelligence, processing speed, as well as just their full scale intelligence scores is what he was tested on. So it just kind of looks at the way he's able to speak and just interact with others, as well as how he can just put that on paper and just perform what he's able to do intellectually. When you look at his scores for this exam, he scored a 75 on his verbal intelligence, which indicates that he was very low in this area. He would need to score at least an 85 to be considered on average, and he's 10 points shy from being on average there. He scored a 70 on his performing intelligence, indicating that he's down to 15 points shy of being average. So again, very low in this area. And then he scored a 71 in processing speed, very low as well. And lastly, he scored a 68 just for his full scale intelligence overall. Now, his 68 indicates just overall intelligence. When you combine them all together, it shows that he is extremely low as a whole. But this was probably a good reason why he was originally labeled as having an intellectual disability. However, since this time, his diagnosis has been changed to just having a severe learning disability. And I feel like that more accurately just depicts who he is. I don't feel like intellectually disabled is a good diagnosis for him. But so during his 1st grade year, he was very low in these areas, and I would love to see this test redone because I feel like he's probably made some extreme improvements between now and then. When you look at his academic achievement testing, he was given the Woodcock-Johnson 3 test of achievement. He was given this in 2012 while he was attending Jonesboro Public Schools. His intelligence exam was given at University Heights during his 1st grade year, and then this one was given at Jonesboro. This Woodcock-Johnson is just, it has 7 different subtests to it. So what it's kind of looking for is his letter word identification, how he's able to comprehend passages that he reads. Can he work applied mathematical problems? How his spelling is. They take different writing samples in this test, and they look at story recall. So can he read a story and then come back and tell you what it was about and give you details and things? And then they also test his ability to understand and follow directions. When you look at all his scores for this exam, remember I believe roughly an 85 is standard. So you want to at least see an 85 in each area to be considered average. He scored a 70 in letter word identification, which indicates that he is low in letter word identification. He scored a 71 for passage comprehension, which again it's low. A 77 in applied problems, indicating that he is low, but not quite as low as the letter word in the passage comprehension. So he's doing a little bit better in math. His spelling, he scored a 37, which indicates that he is very, very low. He's extremely low in the area of spelling. But with his letter word identification and his passage comprehension just being a little bit lower, more so the letter word identification, that kind of helps explain why his spelling is so low. He scored a 59 in writing samples, indicating that he is low in his abilities to write different samples and things. He actually scored a 90 in story recall, indicating that he is average in this area. So being given a story, maybe if you read it to him, he can pay attention and focus, and he is able to pull back those important details and stuff. So he did very, very well in that area. Lastly, he scored an 82 for understanding directions. He was just a little bit low, but he still fell in the average category. So he would be considered low average for following directions. So with all that being said, he was low and extremely low in some areas. He was extremely low in spelling, low in letter word identification, passage comprehension, and math. But he was still average in some areas. He was able to recall stories, and he was low average in understanding directions. So this test, this Woodcock-Johnson, is, I believe it was given around the same time he was changed over from being considered to have an intellectual disability to a severe learning disability, and this is probably a good indicator why, because he's not suffering in all areas of academics. He is able to recall things and follow directions and stuff, which is a great indicator that he's not intellectually disabled. When we look at his social, emotional, and behavioral scales and things like that, he was given a learning disability evaluation. It's also known as the LDES R2. He did this when he transferred to Brooklyn Middle School in his 6th grade year. This was like a scale that was completed by the special education teacher. And a subscale below 85, again, indicates that there is a significant deficit in the educational environment. So there were several subsections scored in this LDES, and that included things like listening, thinking skills, speaking skills, reading skills, writing, spelling, and math calculations again. When you look at this test here, he scored a 92 in listening, which is average. He scored an 86 in thinking, which again is average. His speaking abilities, he got an 87, very much so average. In reading, he scored an 82, which is below average. Writing was a 93, which scored to be average here. Spelling, below average at a 76. And lastly, his math calculations are 88, which scored to be average. And this test here is another example as to why I feel that his intelligence test from the first grade needs to be updated, because this was done in the 6th grade and he's scoring almost average on everything at this point. So I definitely feel like some of these need to be updated for him. I feel like these average scores more so meet his needs, as he's no longer in a self-contained classroom. He was moved out into a resource classroom. When you move forward to his speech screenings and things like that, in February of 2018, so this was just not that long ago, this was last school year, he was given a comprehensive speech evaluation. And for this test, she said that he was at ease during his testing environment and everything. He displayed good levels of just having good attention and focusing, and he was able to concentrate while this test was being given. His voice and fluency skills were informally observed throughout this, and they were considered to be in just the average range for a male at his age. He was given a series of tests during this evaluation. He was given the Arizona Articulation Proficiency Scale, and also the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals. He was given the Test of Language Development Intermediate, as well as the Oral Speech Mechanism Screening Examination. So those are all just typical assessments that speech therapists use to just kind of screen and see where these children fall as far as their speech and language abilities. The Arizona Articulation Proficiency Scale was given just to basically assess his articulation skills of vowels and consonants in the initial and the final positions of words. So they want to see if he's able to get those when the word starts out, as well as on the back end of the words when they end. Standard scores have a mean of 100 on this exam and a deviation of 15. So he's able to go up 15 points or below or whatever to fall in his category. There's room for error. There were 2 errors noted during this assessment, and that was the NM comb and the FO teeth. Those were both errors that were found. When given this assessment, he earned a standard score of 85, and then he had a percentile rank of 16. So he was doing very, very well in this one. If you look down at his clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, this test basically assesses his receptive and expressive language skills, so what he takes in and what he's able to give out in language. It evaluates basic foundations of forms and contents that characterize the mature language use. It looks at word meanings, which would be semantics, as well as word sentence structure, which would be like morphology and syntax. It looks at his recall and retrieval, which would be like his memory. It looks at pragmatics, which would be like the social use of his language. Anything when looking at this exam, a scale score below 8 is considered to be in the deficit range. So when you look at word classes, he scored a 5, so he is showing to have a deficit for word classes. Following directions, though, he scored a 10, so very much so average. Formulated sentences, he scored an 8, so he's right on average there. Recalling sentences, he scored a 7, so he's just a little bit low, but not too bad in recalling sentences. His sentence ability, he scored a 9, so he's average. And then semantic relationships, he scored an 11, which is very well, and he was average in that as well. He also took the, you can call it the SELF 5. It's the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals. For that one, it tests his core language abilities, receptive language, expressive language. For this exam, just his entire score, he was average for everything because you need at least an 85 to be average. Core language, he did an 86. Receptive language, he was a 91. And then his expressive language, he was a 87. Another test he was given for speech was his test of language development. This is also known as the TOLD. So this tests his receptive and expressive language skills. When you look at this, the subtests in this are considered, like, they look at his sentence comprehension and multiple meanings. So sentence comprehension and multiple meanings, I'm sorry. That's the two main things that it looks at. And a scaled score will have an average of 10 and a standard deviation of 3. So he can go above 10 or below 10 and still be considered to be average for these areas, as long as he's no more than 3 above or 3 below. So when you look at his scores, for sentence combining, he scored a 5, so we are below average in that. A 7 in picture vocabulary, so he is low in that as well. Word ordering, again, we got a 7, so we're a little bit low. Relational vocabulary, a 7. When you look at his morphological comprehension, he scored a 4 in this area, so we are extremely low in this area of comprehension. Multiple meanings, he scored an 8, which is considered to be average. Again, we can go 3 below 10 or 3 above. Also, on this same exam, they kind of broke the scores down a little bit differently for 2 different parts of the test. So this one, you're wanting to look at a score of 90 and above to be considered average. When they looked at his listening, he scored a 76, which is below average. It's in the low range. His organization was an 84. Speaking was an 80. Grammar was a 72. Semantics was an 83. And spoken language was a 75. So again, for this, he needed to be at least 90 to be considered average. So once again, we are below average in all areas of this TOLD exam. So the last speech screener that he was given was an oral speech mechanism screening. And in this exam, it's like an informal oral facial examination. So it evaluates like his physical markers, his performance, like his motor performance, structure of speech mechanisms, and like it looks for decreased tongue strength in him and like his mobility with his tongue. And that was actually one thing that was noted on one of his given tasks, was just his ability to use his tongue and the strength of it and everything as he speaks and uses language. So he did pretty well on that exam there. So he was given several speech exams, so she got a really wide range of his abilities and things. So some portions of it he scored to be very well in. There was things he scored low in. But overall, I believe he did really well for speech. Of course, he needs speech therapy. He wasn't high in all areas, so that's a good indicator as far as like his speaking, his grammar, semantics, and spoken language and things. Those definitely show that he does need speech therapy to just be able to learn all those conventions of language and things so that he's not falling behind in that area. When you look at his adaptive behavior testings, he was given the ABAS 3. which is also known as the Adaptive Behavior Assessment System. This was scored by his parents and the teacher in his classroom. This was done in 2017, again, when he transferred to Brooklyn in February. This assessment, it's just very common. It's one that Brooklyn Schools uses quite often. He scored on communication, community use, functional academics, home living, school living, health and safety, leisure, self-care, self-direction, and social. It tests all these different areas. So there's a lot of behavioral and like adaptive things that it looks at. Anything considered to be below an 8 is a deficit for these. And when you look at his scores, by the teacher rating, he was scored to be average in all areas of community use, communication, school living, health and safety, leisure, self-care, self-direction, and social. He did score to be below average in functional academics. When you look at the parent rating, he scored average on all areas except for his home living. He scored below average. Self-care, self-direction, and social, he was showing to have a deficit in those areas. Moving on to his observations that were conducted. So the first one was done for mathematics. So in this observation, it told us that the classroom was very orderly. Things were put in place. It was structured. The lighting was well, and there was very few distractions. His attitude and behavior seemed to be very appropriate during the observation session, and he was observed to be actively working, and he was on task, and he was organized. Justin was given a math worksheet to complete, and he worked on that very effectively after receiving the appropriate directions from the teacher that he needed. And after completing his work, he followed all classroom procedures, and he independently logged into MobyMax as he was requested to do for additional math practice. There was another observation performed on him during his reading instruction. Again, classroom was orderly, few distractions, very well lit. His attitude and behavior were appropriate again, and he was observed to just be actively participating during the activity. He stayed focused. He struggled for several words that were in the text, but he didn't give up, and he just did very, very well overall. Another one that was given, and this is the final one that we have listed in his records, was one that was given for a writing instruction. The classroom, again, was orderly. There was few distractions, very well lit, and his attitude and behavior, again, were very appropriate. He was observed to be actively working again, which is great. It's showing that this is a common trend. He's usually doing his work at school, doing very well. He received feedback from the teacher and asked for feedback as needed during his writing assignment. He was observed during a small group writing activity at this time, and he appeared to become like a little bit discouraged when he saw something that was difficult to him or that he didn't know right away. But once given his teacher feedback, he did really, really well, and he was able to pull himself together and complete his tasks. Looking at other assessments that were given, again, one thing that Brooklyn Schools is extremely big on is our hearing and vision exams. To us, those are one of the most important, because you can't do any of the other testings unless they pass their hearing and their vision. So he was screened at Brooklyn before a lot of this testing was done, before his speech testing and things like that. And he passed his hearing. It was considered to be within normal limits, but unfortunately he did fail his vision. He reported at that time that he actually wore glasses, but he did not have them with them. They were broken. So we were able to give him a Visions of Hope form, and they were able to get him into the doctor and got him some new glasses, and he wore his glasses throughout his screenings. So, with all of his testing put together, his intelligence, his achievement, his social, emotional, behavioral, just the different observations, his speech testing, and his adaptive behavior screenings, he does show to have some pretty severe deficits in different areas, but there are areas that he has his strength. He does not have a deficit in all areas across the board. He struggles with writing, he struggles with reading, and those are the two things that he is currently diagnosed as having a severe learning disability in. So with that being said, I feel like his current disability category of having a severe learning disability, I feel that meets his needs very, very well. Those are definitely the areas that he struggles in. His previous diagnosis of having an intellectual disability, I'm not sure that I feel that ever fully met him entirely. I didn't know him when he was in the first grade, so at that time it may have, but I definitely believe that his intelligence testing needs some updating so that it can show more accurately his current abilities of what he's able to do. Thanks.